The wind rattled the wooden shutters of the small ranch house, carrying with it the dry scent of hay and the distant tang of livestock. Out on the horizon, the sun was just beginning to sink behind rugged hills, painting the sky in deep amber and streaks of crimson. She had never been to this part of the country before, a stretch of land where the days were long, the nights colder than most towns could ever imagine, and the people few but fierce in their ways. She had come with a simple plan: one night, a brief escape from her predictable life, a fleeting connection with a man whose reputation preceded him. That was all she expected. Nothing more. The rancher was already there when she arrived, standing on the weathered porch of the main house, silhouetted against the fading sunlight. He was a figure carved from the very land he worked, tall and solid, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of this vast ranch. His eyes, a piercing shade of gray, seemed to take in every detail at once, weighing and measuring. Yet there was a hint of curiosity in them that she hadn't anticipated. He didn't smile much, not because he was unkind, but because life on this ranch had taught him that a man's expression was his armor. She hesitated at the bottom of the steps, the heels of her boots sinking slightly into the dirt path that led to the porch. The air carried the faint whisper of cattle moving in the pens, the occasional clatter of a gate swinging in the wind, and the low hum of a horse somewhere in the distance. Everything about this place was raw, untamed, and she felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years. "You made it," he said finally, his voice low but steady, carrying the kind of calm assurance that only comes from someone who knows the land like the back of his hand. "Hope your journey wasn't too rough." "It was fine," she replied, keeping her tone casual, though her pulse had quickened. She noticed how his gaze lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, taking in her stance, her coat, and the faint dirt smudges on her boots from the road. There was no judgment in it, only observation, and that made her oddly aware of herself. He stepped aside, motioning toward the porch. "Come on in. Supper's not far off." The inside of the house smelled of wood smoke and baked bread, an aroma that wrapped around her like a familiar blanket she didn't realize she'd missed. The furniture was sturdy, worn from years of use, but it carried the kind of comfort that only things built to last can provide. On the walls, old photographs of the ranch in its earlier days hung, black and white images of men and women in wide-brimmed hats, holding rifles or posing with horses. She could almost feel the history pressing in on her, the weight of generations who had worked this land and carved their lives into it. He poured 2 glasses of iced tea and handed one to her, the gesture casual yet deliberate. "Don't let the quiet fool you," he said, his tone hinting at stories untold. "This land can be harder than most folks realize. I've noticed," she said with a small smile, setting her glass on the wooden table. Her eyes wandered to the window, where the first stars were beginning to peek through the darkening sky. There was a freedom here she couldn't explain, something raw and unpolished that made her pulse quicken. She had come for just one night, a temporary escape, but already the feeling in her chest told her that one night might not be enough. Dinner passed in a rhythm of comfortable silences and quiet conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter that felt rare and precious in a place so tied to routine. He spoke of the ranch, the challenges of keeping it running, and the small victories that came with hard work and perseverance. Each story revealed a layer of him she hadn't expected, a man shaped not just by the land but by the life he had chosen to lead. After supper, they stepped out onto the porch together, the night fully settled now, and the stars shining so bright it seemed as though the entire sky had descended to rest upon the hills. The air had grown colder as she pulled her coat tighter around her. He stood beside her, leaning lightly on the railing, his presence grounding and steady. "You don't get many visitors out here," he said, his voice almost a whisper, carried off slightly by the wind. "Most come for work or a passing trade." "Not for anything else?" She turned toward him, caught off guard by the softness in his tone. "Maybe that's why I came," she admitted, surprising even herself. "I wanted to see what it's like. To be somewhere different." He didn't respond immediately, just looked out over the land, the shadows of the hills stretching across the valley below. "Different can be good," he said finally. "But it can also be dangerous if you're not ready for it." There was a weight to his words that she felt deep in her chest, a tension she couldn't place but that drew her closer to him. She had expected a single night, a brief encounter with someone she barely knew. Yet here she was, feeling as if she had stepped into another world entirely, a world where every glance carried meaning, and every silence spoke louder than words. As the night deepened, the wind carrying whispers through the trees, she found herself lingering on the edge of the porch, not wanting to go back inside just yet. He watched her with that steady gaze, and she realized that the night held more possibilities than she had imagined. The ranch, the man, the endless sky above it all felt like it had been waiting for her quietly, patiently, until now. "Stay a little longer," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. It wasn't a command, but an invitation that left her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. "The night doesn't have to end yet." She hesitated, caught between the plan she had made and the undeniable pull she felt toward this place, this man, and the unknown that stretched before her. One night was supposed to be enough, but the feeling in her chest told her it wouldn't be. The wind rustled the dry grass below, carrying a hint of something she couldn't name, something thrilling and dangerous at the same time. And as she stood there, unsure of what tomorrow might bring, she realized that the night held secrets she hadn't anticipated. One night could change everything. One night could lead her to discoveries far beyond what she had come for. She glanced at him, his eyes catching the starlight, and wondered if he knew the same thing, that what began as a single, fleeting moment could turn into something far more satisfying, far more unexpected than either of them had ever imagined. The air grew colder, and the wind whispered against the wooden beams. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lone note in the vast silence of the valley. She shivered not from the cold, but from the excitement, the suspense, and the undeniable sense that something had shifted between them. She had expected just one night, but the night was only beginning, and the rancher's quiet strength hinted at a story that had yet to unfold, a story that neither of them could have predicted. And in that moment, with the stars overhead and the dark hills pressing in around them, she realized she was on the edge of something far greater than she had ever imagined, something that would change everything, if she dared to take the next step. The stars stretched endlessly overhead, each one a tiny, steady flame in the dark sky, but the rancher's gaze remained fixed on the valley below, as if he could read its secrets just by looking. She stayed beside him, feeling the rough wood of the railing under her fingers, the cold night air brushing against her cheeks. There was something in the quiet of this place that made her senses sharper, every sound and shadow more alive than she had ever noticed before. Even the soft rustle of the wind through the trees seemed to carry a message, as if the land itself was whispering a warning or an invitation, maybe both. She had come from a world of noise and schedules, of crowded streets and constant expectations. This ranch, with its open skies and quiet nights, felt like stepping into another lifetime. She remembered her journey across the narrow dirt roads that had led her here, the sun beating down during the long afternoon, the dust clinging stubbornly to her boots and coat. Each mile had stripped away a little of the tension she carried, leaving her raw and open to whatever this place and this man might offer. He finally spoke again, his voice low, and even like the calm after a storm. "You didn't have to come," he said, but there was no accusation in it, only curiosity. "Most who pass through wouldn't stay beyond what they planned. I wanted to see it for myself," she replied, surprising herself with the honesty of her answer. "I needed a break from everything else. Something real. Something untamed." He gave a faint nod, as if he understood more than she expected. "Real can be dangerous," he said. "Especially out here. You've got to be ready to handle more than just the quiet." She looked at him then, noticing the hard lines around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched and relaxed, the faint scars on his hands that told of a lifetime of work in the sun and wind. He wasn't just a man who ran a ranch. He was a man shaped by it, molded by years of labor, solitude, and the kind of choices that most people never had to make. And yet, there was a gentleness beneath it, a steady patience that drew her closer even as it made her aware of the difference between them. "Tell me about this place," she asked, leaning slightly on the railing. "How long has it been in your family?" He looked away for a moment toward the rolling hills in the distance. "Generations," he said finally. "My grandfather started just after the war. Built the first barns with his own hands. Learned every hill, every creek, every fence line. passed it down to my father and then to me. It's not just land. It's a lifetime of choices, of sweat, of sacrifice. She listened, fascinated. The way he spoke made the ranch more than just property or work. It was history, memory, and struggle all wrapped into one. The night made it feel sacred, as if stepping onto the porch meant stepping into the heart of something larger than either of them. She felt the weight of it pressing gently against her, not suffocating but grounding, giving her a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she had been craving. "What's the hardest part?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. He hesitated, and she noticed a shadow cross his face. "Keeping it alive," he said quietly, "the land. It takes more than you give. You fight weather, you fight time, you fight people who don't care about it the way you do. Some days it feels like you're just surviving." She thought about her own life, the routine that had felt suffocating, the endless stream of obligations and expectations. Out here the struggle was tangible, honest, and immediate. There was no pretense, no layers of social masks, just survival, work, and the land that demanded respect. She understood, in a way she hadn't expected, why he carried himself with such quiet authority. It wasn't arrogance. It was experience, and it was earned. They stayed on the porch for a long while after that, the conversation drifting into pauses filled with the sounds of the night. Somewhere below, a stream gurgled over rocks, carrying water from the hills to the fields beyond. The cattle shifted in their pens, lowing softly to one another. The wind brought a distant smell of pine and dry earth. Each moment felt charged with anticipation, as if the land itself held its breath, waiting for what would come next. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the chance encounter with a letter she had received, unsigned and mysterious, inviting her to the ranch. She hadn't known what to expect, only that it promised a night away from the ordinary. Now standing here, she realized the letter had been just the beginning, a subtle nudge toward something far larger than a single evening. He spoke again, his voice cutting through the quiet like a line drawn in the air. "People don't often understand what it means to come out here. They see the open land and think freedom, but freedom comes with responsibility. Every decision matters. Every day you're here, you learn something new about yourself. Or someone else." She shivered at his words, but it wasn't the cold. It was the realization that she had stepped into a place where choices were clear and consequences unavoidable. She had expected a fleeting night, a simple arrangement that would leave her with a story to tell. But the truth was starting to dawn on her. This place demanded more, and she was beginning to wonder if she was ready for it. "You make it sound dangerous," she said, her tone teasing lightly, though her heart was anything but light. "It can be," he admitted. "If you're not careful, you get swept up, not by storms or cattle, but by people, by life itself. And once it grabs hold, it doesn't let go easily." The wind shifted, carrying a chill that made her pull her coat tighter. She realized then that the ranch was not just a backdrop for a night away. It was a living thing, vast and unpredictable, shaped by the hands of those who had fought for it and protected it for generations. And standing here with him, she understood that the night might hold far more than she had bargained for. She turned her gaze toward the hills, their dark outlines cutting sharp against the starry sky. Somewhere in the distance, a barn door creaked, and she felt a sudden awareness of how alone she truly was out here. It was thrilling, frightening, and invigorating all at once. She wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of her old life, but the pull of the unknown, of what lay beyond that night, was stronger. "You're quiet," he said suddenly, noticing her thoughts. "Thinking about going back?" She shook her head, unsure why she didn't answer immediately. "No," she said at last, "just thinking." "Good," he said, his tone almost approving. "Because once you're in, there's no easy way out. Not if you're truly here." The words hung between them, charged and unspoken, filled with possibilities she couldn't yet name. She realized then that this night, this visit, was no longer about a single fleeting experience. It was about discovery, about confronting the unfamiliar, and about facing the consequences of stepping into a life that had always been distant, untouchable, and utterly real. The air grew colder still, and the first hints of mist began to rise from the low valleys. She could see the faint outlines of fences and paths winding through the property. each one a line in a story she was only beginning to read. Somewhere a horse snorted, breaking the quiet, and she shivered not from the cold, but from the thrill of anticipation. And as the night pressed on, filled with stars, wind, and the unspoken tension between them, she understood one thing clearly. She had expected just a single night, but the ranch, the man, and the wild, untamed land around them promised far more. Something was waiting, something larger than she had imagined, something that would challenge her, change her, and perhaps reward her in ways she could not yet see. The night stretched ahead, long and full of shadows, carrying the scent of earth and the promise of something neither of them could name. She took a steadying breath and realized she was ready to see it through, whatever it might be. The rancher's quiet strength stood beside her, a steady presence in the uncertain darkness, and together they waited for what the night would reveal, knowing that once it came, nothing would ever be the same. The night deepened, and the valley lay shrouded in a blanket of quiet that made even the smallest sounds carry far across the land. She stayed close to the railing, watching the shadows shift among the hills, the fences, and the distant pens. It was a world that seemed alive in ways she had never experienced. Each sound, each movement hinted at stories she could not yet know, and the sense of anticipation was almost suffocating. She felt drawn to it, pulled into the rhythm of the ranch, and yet a small part of her remained cautious, wary of what she had stumbled into. The rancher moved beside her, his boots crunching softly on the wooden boards. "You ever see a place like this before?" he asked, not looking at her, just letting the words hang in the cold night. "Not like this," she admitted. "It's vast, hard, but beautiful." He nodded slowly. "It can be unforgiving, too. People come out here thinking it's just wide, open space, freedom without consequence, but the land, it doesn't forgive carelessness. You learn that fast." She thought about the way he said it, the quiet weight behind each word. It wasn't just the land he was talking about, it was life itself, and maybe her own choices too. The thought made her heart pound. She had expected a night away, a brief escape, but the truth was settling in. This place demanded attention, respect, and courage. From the corner of her eye, she caught movement near the barn. A figure appeared, moving with deliberate steps, carrying a lantern that cast long, flickering shadows across the ground. She realized that the rancher's world extended far beyond this porch, beyond the house, beyond even the visible fences. There were people, tasks, responsibilities she could not yet see, and somehow that made the night feel heavier, fuller, more alive. "They've been here all day," the rancher said, following her gaze, "tending to the stock, preparing for the storms. You learn to move early and work hard. There's no time for idleness." She watched as the figure disappeared behind the barn, then re-emerged carrying a load of feed for the cattle. The rhythmic clatter of the pails and the occasional low call from the animals added a strange music to the night, a rhythm she felt settling in her chest. There was discipline here, a structure born of necessity and survival. And yet, despite the order, the land itself remained wild, unpredictable, dangerous if you weren't careful. "I didn't know it would be like this," she said quietly. "More than I imagined." "Harder, I mean." "Most don't," he replied. "They think it's just a pretty view, sunsets, stars, but it's work, choices, consequences. And sometimes it's more than anyone expects." She turned to look at him, realizing that his eyes held secrets she couldn't yet name. They spoke of years spent alone, of burdens carried without complaint, of victories won quietly and losses endured without witnesses. She wanted to ask more, to understand the story behind those gray eyes and the silence between them, but she also felt a hesitation. The rancher's world was private, intimate, and she wasn't sure she had a right to intrude. Not yet. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from the far hills. It was faint at first, just a promise of storms, but it reminded her that life on the ranch was never still. Everything shifted with the weather, with the animals, with the land itself. One wrong step could mean injury, loss, or worse. She realized that this night, this unexpected visit, was teaching her more than she had anticipated. Not just about him, not just about the land, but about herself, about choices and about facing the unknown. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked suddenly, testing the boundaries of conversation. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt the weight of years in that single gaze. Lonely? He echoed. Sure, but loneliness isn't always empty. Sometimes it's the quiet you need to hear what matters. Sometimes it's the space to understand who you are and who you aren't. She swallowed, thinking of her own life, of the city streets and crowded rooms that had never given her time to hear herself. Here, in the night, she felt a clarity that surprised her. The rancher's words settled in her mind like stones dropped into water, each one creating ripples she could not ignore. The lantern light flickered again in the distance, and she noticed another figure joining the first. A woman this time, moving with the same careful attention, her hands full of supplies. She looked up, catching the faint glimmer of starlight on the porch, and nodded briefly before returning to her task. The ranch was alive, bustling quietly, each person a part of a larger story that she could only begin to guess. "You've got a team," she said, nodding toward the barn. "It takes more than one person to keep a place like this running. Every hand matters," he said. "The ranch teaches you that. The land doesn't care who you are, it only cares what you do. You show respect, you earn trust, you don't, and it will remind you fast." She found herself thinking about her own choices, the life she had left behind and the small risks she had taken just by coming here. It wasn't reckless, at least not entirely, but it was uncharted territory, and that made every sound, every glance, every shadow feel alive with possibility. From the porch, she could see the outline of the hills against the sky, their jagged edges softened by the mist that now began rising from the low valleys. Somewhere below, a creek gurgled quietly, carrying water from hidden springs and feeding the fields beyond. It was a simple thing, natural and unassuming, yet it felt symbolic, a reminder that life here moved with a purpose, that every action had consequence, and that even the smallest ripple could become something larger. "I feel like I'm learning something every minute," she admitted, almost to herself. "About the land, about people, about myself." He didn't respond immediately, just watched her with a steady patience that both unnerved and comforted her. "Finally," he said, "that's the way it works out here. Lessons come whether you ask for them or not. Some are gentle, some they hit you harder than you expect." She shivered, not from the cold, but from the sense of anticipation that tightened in her chest. She realized then that the night had grown thicker, heavier, filled with a tension that neither of them had spoken aloud but both could feel. The ranch, the work, the people, the land itself, they were all pieces of a puzzle she didn't yet understand, and yet she sensed that her place in it was being tested, measured, and invited. A sudden noise broke the moment, the clatter of a gate swinging in the wind. She looked toward the far fence line, where a dark figure moved swiftly, almost slipping between shadows. Her pulse quickened. The rancher's hand went to the railing, steadying himself, and she realized that this was no ordinary night. Something was happening or about to happen that would demand their attention, their skill, and perhaps even their courage. "Stay here," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "Don't move." Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched him disappear into the darkness, moving with confidence and purpose. She had no idea what he was facing, no way to predict what might come, and yet a part of her was rooted to the spot, caught between fear and fascination. The wind carried the faint scent of the earth, rain, and horses, mingling with the smell of wood smoke from the house. The ranch felt alive in a way that was almost overwhelming, and she understood that her night here was far from ordinary. Whatever had started as a simple plan for one evening was transforming into something she could not yet name, something far larger and more demanding than she had imagined. And as she stood there, listening to the sounds of the night and the faint rustle of movement in the distance, she realized the truth. She had expected just a single night, a fleeting escape, but the ranch and the man who ran it were drawing her into a story much deeper than she had anticipated. A story of work, of courage, of risk, and of discovery. The night stretched ahead, full of mystery, danger, and possibilities she could barely comprehend. And she knew, in that quiet, tense moment, that nothing would ever be the same once she stepped further into it. The night had deepened into a shadowed world where shapes moved silently, and every sound seemed magnified in the stillness. She stayed on the porch, her hands gripping the railing, heart pounding so fiercely it felt as though it would break free. The rancher had disappeared into the darkness minutes ago, and though she couldn't see what he faced, the tension in the air pressed against her like a physical weight. The wind whispered across the hills, rustling dry grass and carrying the faint smell of smoke from the hearth inside the house. She felt exposed, yet oddly alive, every sense heightened as though the land itself had made her part of its story. Somewhere beyond the pens, a horse neighed sharply, startling her. The sound echoed across the valley, followed by another, and then the soft clatter of hooves against the wooden fence. Something or someone was moving, testing the boundary between the safety of the ranch and the untamed wilderness beyond. She took a step closer to the railing, peering into the darkness, straining to see any sign of what had drawn the rancher away. Minutes stretched like hours. She tried to steady her breathing, but each rustle, each distant call made her pulse spike. Her thoughts raced. Had there been an intruder? A wild animal? Or was it something even more unpredictable, something tied to the very land itself? She had expected one night, one brief escape, yet here she was, caught in a tension she had not anticipated, teetering on the edge of fear and fascination. The rancher's voice carried faintly through the air, low but commanding, speaking to someone or something just beyond the tree line. She couldn't make out the words, but the urgency in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. Whatever he faced, he was focused, skilled, unflinching, and she realized that the quiet confidence he had carried all evening was no pretense. It was forged in a lifetime of work, of risks, of facing the unknown with steady hands. Her mind wandered briefly to the people she had seen earlier tending the barns. Were they still inside, unaware of the tension outside, or had they too been drawn into the unfolding danger? The thought made her chest tighten. There was a rhythm to this place, a careful balance between survival and unpredictability, and tonight that balance seemed to teeter dangerously. She took a cautious step down from the porch, boots crunching softly on the gravel path. The cold air bit through her coat, but she hardly noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the shadowy figures moving near the fence line. One figure approached with a lantern, revealing glimpses of a face she recognized, the woman from earlier, the one tending the feed. Relief flooded her briefly, but it was quickly replaced by the realization that the tension wasn't over. She had seen the flicker of another shadow, darker, moving with purpose through the trees. The rancher emerged suddenly from the darkness, a faint glow of lantern light catching his face. He moved with deliberate steps, every motion controlled and precise, as if anticipating danger at every turn. When he reached the porch, he didn't speak immediately. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his gaze scanning the night beyond. Then he looked at her and she saw something she hadn't before, concern. A quiet, steady worry that mirrored the fear she felt but refused to let it show. "You should stay inside," he said finally, his voice low, almost a warning. "It's not safe out here." She shook her head, her instincts pulling her forward. "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. "Not now." He studied her for a long moment, and she realized that he wasn't used to someone challenging his authority, standing by his side when danger loomed. Yet there was respect in his eyes, a recognition of her courage or perhaps her stubbornness. "All right," he said at last. "But stay close, and be ready to move if I tell you." Together, they moved down the path toward the barn, the night alive with tension. Every rustle of leaves, every distant animal sound made her heart leap. She noticed the faint tracks in the dirt, the way the soil had been disturbed, and a sense of unease settled deeper in her chest. Someone or something had been here before them, moving quietly, leaving signs that only careful eyes could detect. The rancher stopped suddenly, crouching behind a low fence post. She mirrored his movement, her pulse hammering in her ears. In the dim light, she could see a pair of figures barely visible, moving among the stacks of hay in the pens. Their movements were cautious, deliberate, almost predatory. She felt the air thicken around her, charged with tension, as if the night itself was holding its breath. "Who are they?" she whispered, barely audible. "Not friends," he replied, his voice steady but tight with controlled tension. "They're testing the ranch, testing me. And now they're testing you." Her stomach dropped at his words. The stakes had risen far beyond anything she had anticipated when she agreed to spend a night on the ranch. This was no longer just a brief escape or a simple encounter, it was a confrontation with something she didn't fully understand, something that demanded courage, quick thinking, and trust in the man beside her. They moved closer, using the cover of shadows and the uneven terrain to remain unseen. The figures ahead paused, speaking in low tones she couldn't understand. She caught fragments of words, hints of intention, and it sent chills down her spine. The rancher's hand brushed briefly against hers, a silent signal to stay alert. She realized that in this moment they were not just partners by circumstance, but by necessity, bound together by the unfolding threat. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the barn gate swinging open too forcefully, a feed bucket overturned. The figures froze, then moved quickly, disappearing into the deeper darkness of the property. The rancher didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward and she followed, feet pounding against the dirt, breath coming in sharp bursts. The night seemed to close in around them, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a clue to the movements of the intruders. They reached the barn, the lantern light catching glimpses of scattered hay and the faint outline of footprints leading toward the creek. She could feel the tension building, a pressure that made her chest tight, her senses razor-sharp. The rancher's presence was grounding, his confidence a shield against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Yet she knew they were still far from safety, that the danger had not been confronted fully, and that the night was far from over. A sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow flickering near the creek, almost blending into the darkness. She froze, unsure whether to call out or remain silent. The rancher's hand was on her shoulder, firm and reassuring. "Watch," he said quietly. "Don't move." They crouched behind a low rise, the moonlight glinting faintly off the water, illuminating the subtle shifts in the shadows. The figures moved again, deliberate, calculated, and she felt a surge of adrenaline unlike anything she had ever experienced. Her heart was racing, every nerve alive with anticipation. This was the moment where the tension she had felt all night reached its peak, the moment before action, the moment before revelation, the moment that would define everything that followed. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and earth, the soft murmur of the creek mixing with the distant rustle of trees. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was critical, that the next steps would decide not only the night's outcome but the trust and connection that had been quietly forming between her and the rancher. She felt a strange thrill at the uncertainty, a sense of being alive in a way she had never known, and she realized that one night had already changed everything. The rancher moved forward slightly, eyes scanning, muscles tense. She mirrored his posture, ready to follow, ready to act, ready to face whatever this night would throw at them. The figures ahead paused again, and she caught a flicker of recognition, someone familiar, perhaps someone whose motives were not yet clear. The suspense was unbearable, each second stretching longer, charged with the weight of expectation, danger, and the unknown. And in that moment, as the night wrapped them in shadow and the creek whispered its endless song, she understood that the story she had come for one night, one escape, was far larger, far more intense, and far more rewarding than she could have imagined. The ranch, the land, the man beside her, and the mystery moving through the darkness were all converging into a climax she could not yet see, but one that promised to test her, change her, and perhaps lead to something unforgettable. She tightened her grip on the rough wood beneath her, heart hammering, breath shallow, as they waited. Every sense was alert, every thought focused, every instinct alive. The night held its secrets close, but she knew the climax was coming just beyond the next shadow, just beyond the next movement, just beyond the moment when the tension could no longer hold. The wind whispered, the creek gurgled, the figures moved again, and the anticipation became almost unbearable. Every heartbeat echoed in the still night, a drum signaling that the turning point was near. She glanced at the rancher, his eyes sharp, his body poised, and felt a surge of confidence. Whatever was about to unfold, she was ready, or as ready as anyone could be when the unknown pressed so close. The night was alive, every shadow a question, every sound a warning, and as they crouched together in the darkness, waiting for the next move, she realized that one night had already changed everything, and that the true climax, the moment that would define all that had come before, was just seconds away. The wind had calmed, the tension in the air easing as the first hints of dawn began to touch the horizon. The night had stretched long, filled with uncertainty, shadows, and the sharp pulse of anticipation. She stood beside the rancher, watching the dark hills soften into shades of gold and pink, the creek glittering faintly as it wound through the valley. Everything felt quieter now, almost serene, but the echoes of the night's events lingered in her mind like the soft memory of a storm just past. The figures that had moved through the darkness were gone, revealed to be local troublemakers testing the ranch's defenses, more curious than malicious. The rancher had confronted them with a calm authority, letting them know the boundaries clearly without escalating the conflict. Their retreat had been swift once they realized the determination and skill of the man who ran this land. She watched from the porch as they disappeared over the distant rise, the tension finally unspooling, leaving a sense of relief and quiet triumph. "You handled that well," she said softly, still catching her breath from the night's adrenaline. Her eyes met his, and she saw not only the satisfaction of resolution, but also the quiet pride of someone who had lived his life mastering challenges that most would shy away from. He gave a small, rare smile, the lines around his eyes softening. "Years of experience," he said simply. "This land teaches you patience, caution, and the value of timing. You learn who you are, and you learn who you can trust." She nodded, feeling a warmth beyond the chill in the morning air. The night had been more than she could have imagined. It had tested her, pushed her, and yet it had also shown her the depth of life in a way the city never could. She realized now that the brief escape she had planned had turned into an experience that would stay with her forever. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying the quiet weight of genuine gratitude, "for letting me be here, for showing me all of this." He looked at her with a calm steadiness, a gaze that seemed to measure not just her words but the sincerity behind them. "You didn't just come here for one night," he said. "You came looking for something. I think you found more than you expected." The ranch was waking slowly now. The first calls of the livestock mingled with the soft clatter of activity from the barn. She could see the people she had glimpsed the night before working together to repair fences, feed animals, and prepare for the day ahead. The harmony between them, the way each person's effort connected to the other, reflected the unspoken rules and rhythms of ranch life. It was demanding work, yet the sense of purpose and unity gave it a quiet beauty that touched her more than she could put into words. She glanced at the rancher, noticing the ease with which he moved among his people, giving instructions, lending a hand, and maintaining order with a calm authority. He was part of this land as much as it was part of him, and she could see how much responsibility and care he carried, not just for the property, but for the lives intertwined with it. She felt a deeper respect, and something else, something quieter but powerful, stirred within her a sense of connection she hadn't expected when she arrived. "Do you always start the day this early?" she asked with a light laugh, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. He chuckled softly, a sound that was rare and unexpectedly warm. "Every day," he said. "The land doesn't wait, and neither can we. Sunrise brings a rhythm you can't ignore. It teaches you discipline, endurance, and sometimes it teaches you gratitude for simple things." She looked around, taking in the wide fields, the sturdy barns, the glint of the creek, and the first hint of sunlight on the hills. Gratitude swelled in her chest, not just for the beauty around her, but for the lessons she had learned during the night, for the courage she had discovered within herself, and for the man who had quietly guided her through it. "You've changed my perspective," she admitted, her voice soft but sincere. "I thought I needed a night away to escape, but now I see that life out here, with all its challenges, can teach you more than any city or crowd ever could." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes it takes stepping away from what you know to see what really matters. This land doesn't hide its truth. It gives you clear lessons, and it rewards those willing to learn. You came here seeking something fleeting, and I think you found something lasting instead." The morning unfolded slowly, filled with quiet work, shared moments, and a sense of relief after the night's tension. She joined in, helping feed a few animals and learning the rhythm of chores she had never expected to find herself doing. The rancher watched, guiding her gently, offering instruction without impatience. It was a teaching filled with patience and trust, and she felt herself growing more capable, more confident, more a part of this rugged world than she had thought possible. By midday, the sun was high and the air warmer, carrying the faint scent of hay and the soft murmur of distant animals. The rancher and she stood together on a rise overlooking the fields, the land stretching wide and golden before them. It was a quiet, shared moment, the aftermath of tension, the calm after the storm, and it felt profoundly significant. "You've got a strong heart," he said, breaking the silence, his voice steady and calm. "Not everyone could have handled last night or even chosen to face it. You stayed, you observed. You learned? And you didn't run," she smiled faintly, feeling both proud and humbled. "I didn't expect to," she admitted. "I came for one night, thinking it would be simple. But it wasn't, and now I wouldn't change a thing." The rancher studied her quietly for a long moment, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Sometimes what you think you want isn't what you need," he said softly. "And sometimes the land, the people, the night, can show you more than you ever imagined." She looked out across the fields, the hills, the barn, and the creek, feeling the quiet weight of those words. Everything about this place had tested her, taught her, and yet welcomed her. It wasn't just a ranch. It was a life, a rhythm, a way of understanding the world that demanded courage, respect, and presence. And in the warmth of the morning sun, she realized that the story she had sought to escape, the adventure had become something far richer, far more meaningful than she had ever planned. The rancher placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. "You're welcome here," he said. "Not just for one night, not just for curiosity, but for as long as you choose to be, the ranch. It has a way of keeping those it trusts." She felt a swell of gratitude and something deeper, a quiet understanding that she had been changed forever. The fears and tension of the night had passed, leaving clarity and a sense of purpose. She had learned the rhythm of this land, the value of trust, and the power of courage in the face of uncertainty. And most of all, she had discovered a connection that was honest, steady, and unexpected. As she stood there, side by side with the rancher, the wind carrying the sense of earth, hay, and animals, she realized that she had come for one night, but she had found a lifetime. The lessons of the ranch, the strength of the land, the resilience of its people, and the quiet guidance of the man beside her had opened a door to a life she could embrace fully. And in that moment, she knew the story was complete, not because every mystery had been solved, not because every challenge had been faced, but because she had stepped into a world that was real, alive, and full of possibilities. The night's tension had taught her patience, courage, and the joy of discovery, and the day's light promised more adventures, more lessons, and more moments of quiet triumph. The ranch stretched out before them, golden and alive under the morning sun. The creek sparkled, the animals moved contentedly, and the wind whispered through the trees as if carrying approval. She turned to the rancher, a smile of genuine happiness and gratitude on her face. "Thank you," she said again, softly, sincerely, "for everything." He returned the smile, one that reached his eyes this time, warm and steady. "You didn't just come for a night," he said. "You came to live a story. And it looks like you've already started." She looked out across the fields, the barn, the hills, and the endless sky above, feeling a deep peace and connection she had never known. The ranch, the man, the land, it was all more than she had expected, far beyond a single night. And she knew, without doubt, that whatever came next, she was ready. The night's lessons, the suspense, and the challenges had all led to this moment. Clarity, fulfillment, and the quiet joy of discovering a place and a life she could truly call her own. The morning sun rose fully over the valley, the promise of a new day bright and clear. She took a deep breath of the crisp, earthy air, feeling alive, grounded, and ready. The rancher stood beside her, and together they watched as the world stretched awake, vast and full of potential. One night had led to a lifetime of understanding, courage, and satisfaction. She had come seeking an escape, and she had found far more, a home, a connection, and the knowledge that some experiences are worth far more than anyone can anticipate.